Hi everyone, welcome back to the Ready Steady Strong YouTube channel. My name is Mike and I've been a strength coach for 15 years. And over that time, I've trained a lot of different people to reach a number of different goals. And there's been one kind of common thread across the various goals that my clients have had, and that is rehab and injury. Now, I'm not a rehab specialist and I don't work with people when they have just been injured, but I've met a lot of people that have come into the gym and they are struggling to manage an old injury, or they're training around an injury, or they've specifically come to build up confidence and strength in an area that was previously injured. And across those types of clients and across those times, I've noticed one thing that a lot of people come into the gym having been injured and seeing some kind of rehab professional. There's normally been one thing that they're missing that has stopped them from making more progress, which normally necessitates them coming to me in the first place. And that is this concept of progression that we take very seriously within training, but hasn't quite permeated into the world of rehab. So progression is the concept of progressing, obviously, but it's more about the way that when we're training long term, we layer in very small advances in training progress over time. And this isn't just a phenomenon that happens as you train, it's something we have to consciously look for and consciously kind of add into a program as we're designing it. So the world of rehab and physio is getting better when it comes to helping people train through an injury and kind of recover and take proactive steps to get better from an injury. But I want to describe the kind of trajectory of a person that I would typically meet for a consultation who comes in having, kind of managing an injury or something like that. So typically what happens is they have this injury or pain that may stem from one particular incident, such as an accident or an actual injury playing their sport or training in the gym. Or rather than being one particular incident, it might be something that has grown kind of chronically over time, like a kind of overuse injury or some like inflammation based, like a tendinopathy or something like that. And they come into the gym, and if they're at the point of working with me, then typically what would have happened is they would have gone to a physio or a rehab professional for that very early stage care. And that person may have given them some bad exercises and stretches to go away with, may have given them, an app or a leaflet to go away and follow that tells them what they have to do to get better from their injury. And for a lot of the people that I meet and have worked with, this kind of stage of their journey has involved very light exercises, very kind of high repetition movements that generally have the aim of getting someone to return to a point of day-to-day function. So what I mean by that is that, let's say, for example, it was a shoulder injury, they had an accident falling down the stairs or something. The rehab normally gets them to a point of being able to lift their arm over their head again and brush their teeth and carry shopping bags and stuff like that. It gets them back to doing the things they need for day-to-day tasks without crazy levels of pain. And for a lot of people, that's as far as it goes because it allows them to live their life and kind of, for most of the time, ignore the old injury. But often it doesn't go much further from that, and that person doesn't really ever feel as confident going back into the movements they used to do or the activities that they used to do. And this can lead to a kind of lingering background problem that causes, a lack of activity, a loss of certain movements and abilities that the person used to have. And often in these stories, the injury never fully gets better. A lot of people feel very frustrated by this, and it also can kind of affect their belief systems when it comes to training. So, you'll see a lot of these memes about people over 30 where they'll say, I used to have a left knee and a right knee, now I have a good knee and a bad knee. And that kind of thing kind of permeates quite a lot where, someone will spend a long period of their life thinking, oh, this is my bad shoulder, or this is my bad knee, and I can't do this on that side because that's my bad shoulder, that's my bad knee. And they just kind of live with that belief that they can't do that thing. And that can be very debilitating. It can be frustrating for a person. And some people just learn to live with it and don't really realize how much of a problem it is until something else happens, like they try a sport for the first time in ages, or they do something else to it and it gets re-injured again. But I think the point here is clear. There's kind of an early stage of rehab and physio, a return to regular levels of function, and then we get maybe like 70-80% of the way towards feeling 100% better, and then we just kind of fall off the bandwagon and there's not much more progress made from there. And this is the stage at which progression is really sorely lacking, and where it kind of makes its absence known, because without that progression, that's as far as you'll ever get. And you'll stay with that kind of injured side or that bad side or that joint that you don't fully trust, and you'll kind of have this blacklist of exercises that you don't feel you can do anymore. And it's a real shame So progression is that thing that gets you to the next level. So when someone has an injury or an old pain or something that's been bothering them for a long period of time, one of the first things that I like to do, and one of the first things that a lot of physios and rehab professionals do as well, is they'll start to try to quantify that injury or pain in as many different ways as they can. So typically what that might mean is that you're looking at things the person can do surrounding that injured area and things they can't do. And it might be that they can't do it because they feel weak there or they lack a range of motion, or it might be that doing those activities will trigger a flare up in the pain and be really sore for the next couple of days or even longer. But essentially you get this list of kind of good activities and bad activities. And that is unique to the individual, and really that's a common thread all the way through this, is that whenever we're kind of working with injury, it does tend to be very unique to the individual's experience. But so when we're looking at this list of things that someone can do and can't do, and we're looking at how we can progress as well, then what that tends to mean is we build this profile of the injury that includes things like what kind of duration you can do things for. So for example, let's say it was an ankle or a knee injury, you might be able to run 1 or 2K with no problem, and you go for like 3 to 5K and there's like a bearable amount of pain, and anything beyond 5K, you're in excruciating pain for days and days after. So one of your things on your list might be that you can run 1 to 2K no problem. It might be to do with range of motion. So I might have a shoulder injury and I might be able to rotate my arm up to about here, and anything past here might become really painful. I might not have the range to get my arm all the way or to get my arm all the way overhead. So again, we can start to quantify this list of good and bad activities, or good things we can do and things we can't do. We might be able to quantify that in terms of range of motion as well. If the injury is gym related, then of course we can look at what kind of weights people can lift. Maybe you can squat a certain weight pain-free, but whenever you go beyond that weight, you start to get pain. And it also might include things like speed of movement or the kind of elasticity used in the movement. So you might find that someone can squat perfectly well, but they can't jump because jumping, is a faster movement, and that's where they get pain. It might be they can jump from a dead start, like jumping from sitting on a bench, but they can't jump with that kind of elastic downward motion and an upward motion because something about rapidly stretching into that jump, maybe that's what causes pain. So we just build this list of things that are good and bad, and things that we can gradually progress over time, basically. So the things that a person can't do, or the kind of limitations and those thresholds that someone has before they start to encounter a really disruptive level of pain, those are the things that we're going to progress gradually over time. And in a much more simple sense as well, it also means just progressing those exercises that you've been given. So if you were doing some rotator cuff exercises or some knee exercises in the gym, it would just be a kind of standard progression of those on their own terms. So lifting more weight, doing more reps, maybe doing more sets. They don't need to directly relate to those things you can't do, but those are just other things that we need to chip away at their progression every couple of weeks by a very small margin. So 1 or 2 reps, maybe like 5% weight increase for the same number of reps. But it's just that very gradual, very small level of progress, provided that there's not, additional pain or additional flare-ups. And often when it comes to knowing how to progress in this way, a lot of specialists in the rehab and physio world will talk about a scale of pain from 1 to 10, with 10 being very painful, 1 being hardly painful at all. And the rough kind of aim that people are given is that the exercises shouldn't elicit more pain than like a 3 out of 10. Those would be the kind of benchmarks that often guide whether it's the right time to progress or whether we need to stay where we are for just a little bit of time. And although I'm approaching this as a trainer, those bits of advice about pain scales and how long after the activity should it be painful, we still take those recommendations from physios and rehab professionals. And I often, if a client does have an injury, I'm often collaborating with people in that field. And that can be a nice way to get the best of both worlds, where you get the input from an injury specialist, but you also then get someone who spends all their time in the gym, who knows how to sensibly progress exercises and understands movement and load very well and can layer on those progressions over time. So there's a number of reasons why this is effective and why we should be pursuing progressive gym training to help resolve injury and pain. Number 1 is that we know resistance training is very good for mobility. So resistance training has been shown several times to have similar improvements on mobility as to what we would get from static stretching. But obviously what we're doing is we're also building strength and hopefully making kind of physiological change by adding more external weight. So not only are you getting the benefits of stretching, but you're also getting stronger in that range you're stretching into, and you're hopefully developing muscle tissue and, kind of connective tissue strength around that as well. Confidence is a big factor there as well, because if I need to go into a range of motion that I previously couldn't do and I can't tolerate any load in that position, then chances are I'm going to be very restrictive around that movement and very wary and possibly very kind of susceptible to re-injury if I have no strength in a certain range of motion. Resistance training is also recommended quite often in injuries where we need to make a physiological change. So where there may be a problem with the makeup of the muscle or the connective tissue and where we may need to stimulate a certain level of remodeling or growth in that area. So tendons, you hear that quite a lot with kind of tendinopathies, where there's often recommended kind of eccentric training where you're focusing on just doing the lowering part of a movement, but you're doing it under higher levels of resistance. And, certain other studies would suggest that those kind of injuries just respond to all kinds of resistance training quite well. By targeting an injury with resistance training as well, we can also rebuild in movement literacy. So if an area was immobilized for a long period of time, maybe in a cast, maybe after surgery, then it could be that it hasn't moved in months, although typically now people don't immobilize things for as long. They try to get people moving again as soon as possible. But still, nonetheless, we can choose exercises to help rebuild confidence and skill in certain movements. And again, that means if my day-to-day tasks or my sporting activity asks me to suddenly go into a position that I couldn't do for the 6 months I was in a cast, then it means that I'm now much more familiar, much more stronger, and much more confident in that position. But by far, the most important reason why we use progression and gym training to get back from an injury is because it's scalable. I've said this before in some of my other videos, but gym training is the thing where we have the most control over our variables, such as time, reps, weight, number of sets, speed, all those things. We can be much more selective with the activities we do in order to create a challenge for the injured area that exactly matches our criteria. I've used this example before, but let's say, for example, I have someone who's had a knee injury and they want to return to five-a-side football. If they go from doing their very light exercises and still being a little bit sore and a little bit untested around that area, and they go back into a five-a-side game, we have no way to control how much activity that person is going to do during that game, how much time they're going to get around the ball, what kind of movement angles and skills they're going to need to perform. Are they going to need to change direction? Are they going to be sprinting? Are they going to be decelerating under high forces? Are they going to be jumping for headers and stuff like that? We can't really control any of that in advance because it's all random based on the output of the game. We also can't control for things like collisions with other players. That's a big factor because, again, that's a really unpredictable element. Whereas in the gym, I can design drills and activities that will layer in the amounts of kind of jumping, landing, cutting, sprinting, changing direction. We can use effort level and speed as a kind of benchmark for how confident we are sprinting and things like that. Not to mention the full use of gym equipment to decide what range of motion we work a joint in, how much stretch we can tolerate, how much load we can tolerate, all the things I've already talked about. We just have pinpoint control. Because we have that control and we have this list of things that the person can do and can't do, we can start to create a road back to play or a road back to activity that almost in some cases replicates the original injury. So if we know there was a really clear mechanism for that first injury, we don't want to hide away from that because then what happens is we build no strength in that position. So let's say, for example, someone was performing a cutting movement, they were changing direction in tennis, for example. We know what that position looks like. We know kind of what forces and strains that puts on the knee and the leg. And I also know that if my client wants to return to tennis in the future, they can't avoid that movement forever. So I can create this kind of phased return into those types of movements in a very controlled way so I can build their tolerance over time to eventually get them back to a point where they feel confident doing that. And if I can do that and I can build someone's strength and confidence and tolerance back in the movement or the skill or the circumstances that caused the original injury, then I might have a better chance of preventing them from re-injuring that area in the first place. One of my favorite examples of that concept is a mixed martial artist that I worked with for a couple of years when I was fresh out of university. So I'd just done my degree in strength and conditioning and I was working alongside a physio team, and we had this MMA fighter who had lost one of her fights because her elbow had broken when she was in an armbar. So if you look up on YouTube what an armbar is, it's a certain move, a submission in jiu-jitsu where someone's arm gets hyperextended. It gets locked out with great force and can eventually break. And what that meant is when it healed, this mixed martial artist who had to throw punches and kicks as well as wrestle felt that she couldn't fully straighten her arm. She couldn't lock her arm out into a punching movement or into anything else. She went to her doctor about this, and her doctor was almost kind of glad that she couldn't do this, because the doctor didn't want her to go back to a point where she could re-injure herself by going back to end range. And myself and the physio specialist I was working with strongly disagreed about this, because if you can't go back to that movement, you're basically saying that person can't compete ever again. You're saying that they can't ever straighten their arm. There was no reason from a perspective of the joint why they should be able to straighten their arm. It's not like the bone had healed wrong or anything like that. It was purely an avoidance strategy from the doctor to prevent the thing happening again. But if we had never rehabbed that particular fighter, if she had never done the exercises and regained her range of motion, then she never would have been able to straighten her arm. And if by chance something had happened where her arm had been forcibly straightened, she would have had no strength there, and it could have led to other injuries caused by the fact that her muscles around the elbow had never developed any tolerance in the straightened range of motion. So we designed a hierarchy of exercises that would get her closer and closer to straightening her arm under different levels of load, under different levels of kind of apprehension and wariness. And eventually, over time, she was able to straighten her arm fully and go back to fighting again. But that's just one example of how we use gym exercises and this concept of progression to get you back into the activities you used to do, so that you can no longer have one good side and one bad side. I have quite a high frequency of people that come to me for consultations, and they want to get strong and they want to train, but they've had kind of persistent knee pain or back pain in the past. And again, we would do the same thing, just with more traditional gym exercises, where we would create this scale of kind of the most knee-focused exercise or the most provocative knee exercise and the least, and we would kind of gradually progress them up to that most provocative exercise when their tolerance was ready, when they felt better. So if you're stuck with a stubborn injury, if you're really kind of frustrated and don't know where to go with those injuries, then think about your progression. Think about when was the last time your exercise routine changed. Think about what you can and can't do, and see how we can very gently nudge into those movements that you can't do. And I would strongly recommend, obviously, seeking out professional help to help you do that. You'd be surprised how well a professional can customize a program to you, and how well they can layer on really subtle level of changes, so you don't have to make really big jumps too soon and end up kind of re-injured again. So that's it for today. If you are someone who's injured and you're getting really frustrated with that injury, please don't give up. Please don't lose hope. Hopefully this video has shown you that there are things you can do, things you can try that will kind of take you to the next level without you having to make these massive jumps, or without having to get constantly re-injured. I can't speak for all injuries, but most of the time there is something you can do, and there is something that hasn't quite been tried yet. So don't give up. Please get in touch if you want help kind of building that return to training program. And also feel free to leave any questions in the comment section. If there's any particular videos you want to see or any questions you want me to answer, then get in touch. As always, make sure to check out the blog. Make sure to follow my Instagram as well. And of course, like and subscribe, ring the bell, share my videos with your friends, all that stuff. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you again for the next video.